people can just come in as we go here. But I want to make sure we have as much time as possible to take advantage of this session because I'm really excited to welcome Christine Nielsen, who is actually just told me she's been the head of CSMLS for 16 years now. And she brings basically a wealth of knowledge in basically laboratory management and stewardship. And she's been spearheading kind of in a way a lab complement to the Choosing Wisely campaign. And so she's going to kind of go through what is out there in terms of resources and what's been done in terms of Lab Wisely. And I'm hoping that this kind of, we were talking about how this lab utilization is important, not just for stewardship of labs, but even also impacting things like planetary health and obviously even just sustainability of the system. So I'm really excited to welcome Christine Nielsen. And I won't do a land acknowledgement because I saw on your slides you have one, so I'll leave that to you. So welcome, Christine.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I'm excited to talk about all things lab stewardship. CSMLS has been on a pretty long journey. So I've got, don't have a fit. Yes, you are seeing 68 slides there. Some of them are super short and super brief with just a check mark on them. So bear with me. I'm going to motor on through and I want to make sure that I leave some time for questions because for some of you, this is a brand new topic and others are like super old news and get on with it. So away we go. So I have no conflict of interest to declare. I work for CSMLS. The content that I'm presenting belongs to CSMLS and our partner at University of Alberta. So if it were not for the stewardship of Dr. Amanda Vance Bronson as part of her PhD thesis and her ongoing commitment for the last decade on the importance of utilization and Dr. Smith mentioned today that, part of the things we'll talk about is utilization in the context of climate change. And that's something that Amanda is very passionate about. And I'll say I was a little bit later to the table than Amanda on the importance of climate change and our overutilization in lab services. So thank goodness there's my job as CEO is to step aside and let the experts do their work. And so we're very grateful to the ongoing contributions from University of Alberta. And we also, I'm going to talk a little bit at the end about something called a widget, which is a tool that's available English and French, free to use. And it was funded by Choosing Wisely Canada, and they had given us two $10,000 grants over 2 years so that we could make and then improve the product. So I have a territorial acknowledgement. I am in Ontario, and many of you won't recognize the name that I have on the screen. Norland is outside of Minden, Ontario, which is cottage country. This is not where I live full time. It's a place I visit. And so I'll do my land acknowledgement just to say that, it's a moment of reflection for me to think about the land that I work on and play on and live on. And where I am today, Norland is part of the traditional territories of the Mississauga Nations, and it's recognized as being within scope of the Williams Treaties 1923, which, like many treaties, were not exactly clear or fair to the Indigenous folks. So I always like to take a moment to remind myself of the troubled history of Canada and the things that we can do in moving forward in a spirit of reconciliation. So the CSMLS may be new for some of you. So the Canadian Society for Medical Laboratory Science is located in Hamilton. We've been there since 1937. It feels some days like I have been there since 1937, but that is not true. I have been working at CSMLS since 2003. And it started as a certification agency. And that's important because we started in 1937 as a group of people who wanted to create harmonized standards for people who were working in the lab. At that time, and it's a very long time ago, who worked in lab medicine? Well, sometimes physicians' spouses came to the lab because they wanted something to do. And in other cases, we had men and women working side by side with degrees in different parts of science, like chemistry, that were doing the exact same job. And people said, that doesn't seem right. And so a certification body was born in 1938, delivered our first certification exam. We're primarily a membership-based organization for MLT and MLA, and we have a voluntary certification program for lab assistants, and we also have a mandatory certification program that starting March 1 is only applicable in the province of Alberta. We're not here to talk about the politics of my profession, so I'm just going to move on from that. All this to say, we are a membership-based organization that also does certification, and our role is changing a little bit in the future. So a good presentation has to have an agenda so you understand why I'm here. So my job today is to help you learn about the CSMLS contributions to the Choosing Wisely database, and their roster of over 500 recommendations. Become a little bit familiar with the database that we created for Choosing Wisely, and explore use of the widget to estimate potential savings and impact. And impact can be impact on the patient, from blood conservation to impact to the just cost to tech time, as well as to climate change. And then I have some success stories because it's all fine and well to have a theoretical presentation, but does change actually work or matter? And so I have a smattering of facilities throughout Canada that I'll be able to highlight how they've implemented changes with a Lab Wisely lens, and the actual savings or what's happened in their facilities. So today, I hope that the participant will be able to leverage a free resource from Lab Wisely to reduce lab testing in a manner that does not compromise patient care. I sometimes worry when I look south and I see some of the incentives for family practitioners to decrease their use of testing. And in some cases, we've heard about financial bonuses being awarded to people to curb their testing. And I'm not sure that that's the right motivator, to have financial motivations to decrease costs to a healthcare system, but that's just what's happening down south. So, what is Choosing Wisely Canada? Well, it's the national organization that focuses on reducing unnecessary tests, procedures, and treatments in Canada. It was patterned after Choosing Wisely from the United States, which is since wrapping up or has been suspended. So, Choosing Wisely Canada came here inspired by the US, but not being maintained by the US. And that's the end of the link. Inspiration only. They publish a list created by healthcare societies. It's within scope of practice for the society. And I'll just say, from the outside, it seems weird to tell people what not to do. Most of us work on framing things in a positive light. You tell people what to do, not what not to do. But that is how Choosing Wisely Canada recommendations are framed. They're a don't do set of recommendations. So when CSMLS first became involved, there was already 300 recommendations that existed before we even became involved. So today there are 500 recommendations. Over 60 societies are participating. There are many toolkits, and there's several pan-Canadian initiatives. We submitted our first list in 2020 and a second list in the fall of 2023. We made a searchable database, and that happened because our volunteers realized, when they looked at, what else has been done within Choosing Wisely Canada, they started to realize of the 300 recommendations, over 100 spoke about lab testing. And yet there was no single place or aggregator for a person to log on to say, what kind of reductions could I make in packed cells? What kind of reductions could I make with a vitamin D test? What kind of reductions could I make in, IgG testing? And so we decided to get a handle on that. And so we made a searchable database that's English and French. And we also, there'll be a little detail on that later. And we also modified and created something called a widget. One of the neatest things, and this is why people do marketing that are not me, we decided before we moved forward, we wanted to have an identifiable visual marker for this project. Choosing Wisely Canada has its own identity. Lab Wisely is a CSMLS identity. So we created a contest and had our members tell us, what kind of icon would you like to see that would speak to you? And we ended up with this little provocative owl opening up his lab coat and showing you some testing vials. So this is our icon for Lab Wisely. So you'll see this little owl in a couple of places in my presentation. So our Lab Wisely 2020 list: don't collect more blood than what is needed. Don't proceed with testing or reporting when sample quality or identification is suspect. Don't collect extra blood tubes in anticipation of test orders. That one's really important. Emergency rooms love to tack on an extra tube while we got the vein open, just in case we need to do an add-on. And I have a story about London Health Sciences and why they changed doing that. Don't support repeat test ordering, retesting at a frequency that is not backed by evidence. When we had joined Choosing Wisely Canada, there was a very early conversation with a very honest group of physicians who said they are horrified to admit this, but in their hospital, there was an inpatient who was having labs drawn every single day, and there was no attending, and no one read their chart for 3 months, and blood was being drawn every single day. Data was going nowhere. Now, nobody wants that to happen. Um, don't routine repeat critical results for the most common analytes before reporting. A critical result is a critical result in most cases. Don't support ordering system mechanisms that contribute to over testing, and that could be bundling of tests. And don't allow standing orders for repeat testing without a stop or a review date. So that's the list that we put out into the ether. We let our members get used to it. Some of the barriers, key to us was identifying what are the barriers for medical lab scientists to speak up and try to curb behavior. And so we had to uncover the psychology of the profession as well, and why sometimes we feel we can't find our voice. So that was part of the research as well. So one of the things that we did was we knew that there was a long list of things that we wanted to put into the recommendations, but they didn't make it. And why didn't they make it? Well, there wasn't enough evidence, but a really great gut feel. Well, if you're choosing Wisely Canada, you can't accept recommendations because they feel good. You need to have some evidence behind it. We also were challenged because we can't make recommendations about things that are beyond our scope of practice. And we were also surprised because Choosing Wisely, for the most part, likes lists of 5. So we were shocked to know 7 of ours made it. And in 2023, after our community had lived with these recommendations, we decided to do it all over again. I'll also say Choosing Wisely Canada makes sure that of all those 60 different associations who have recommendations, every year they go back to us and challenge us. Are these still important? Are these still relevant? Do you have changes you need to make to your list so that when the new year hits, they're able to say these are still the authoritative recommendations coming from the societies? So in 2023, we had a list of also rans from the first time. We looked at what other societies were doing within Choosing Wisely to make sure we don't have any duplication. And then we also looked at what else was happening in other countries around the world, because lots of countries are implementing something that looks like Choosing Wisely Canada. Like any good process, we had an assessment criteria. It had to be something that could lead to increased risk of patient harm. It had to be the practice needed to be limited because it was unlikely to benefit patient care. And this becomes important because there are many people who have recommendations in Choosing Wisely about end of life care. And there is a time when medical technologists would always ponder, when we know we have an end of life case, why are we collecting labs every day? We can tell you what you already know, which is they're in multi-organ failure. Why are we spending time, effort, and energy on this when we all know where this is heading? And several of the societies now do have end-of-life recommendations. And practice should be limited because it's associated with resource waste, such as time, labor, money, or environmental. And we also wanted to take on things that are frequently or commonly performed. So there's a lot of room for change in the healthcare system from ordering patterns, but these were the ones we wanted to focus on. So we also had to make sure that these were places that a medical lab assistant or a medical lab technologist could have a say in the practice. And there's many things and many areas that we don't get to participate in. So we ended up with 12 new finalists. 2 of them had conflicting evidence. That's not good. So we had to kick those to the curb. 2 were deemed similar enough to be combined, and 9 of them went to Choosing Wisely Canada. After our CSMLS Board of Directors said, we're comfortable putting our name behind these as evidence for inclusion coming forward from the CSMLS. Well, this is what happened. And you're going to see some heavy edits here and see what a process looks like when we have volunteers who know what they want to do, but others who get to oversee or approve their work. So we put forward, don't recommend tests that are not in response to specific clinical questions. And there were some edits that took place and it cleared. Don't collect specimens from patient approaching end of life if the results don't serve the patient's indicated therapy goals. This one was important because it picks up on like Pallium Canada and other people's recommendations. We have some things where we basically said we would like to reject samples if they don't fit certain criteria. And we were kind of told that's not really your scope of practice. So there's some things that have X's on them, and don't hesitate to address high sample rejection rates, even when the rejection is performed by a non-lab person. They said that's not your scope either. So we gave that one up. Don't perform a manual differential on a CBC if a recent valid automated differential result remains unchanged. I think everybody knows a manual differential count is a really outdated way for the human eye to look down the microscope and count 100 slides when the complete blood count is counting millions of slides. So it is very rare that the instrument is wrong. There are sometimes clots and a few other times where the instrument is not performing, but guess what? You would already know that from your quality control and your calibration, and you would also see trending and shifts if there's like a plug in a line or whatever that is. So this is something that when the complete blood count was changed to doing automatic cell counters, and I am just old enough to have remembered when people did not trust the automated cell counters at all. These are the old Coulter S+5. So these are in the, I'm going to say, early 90s. Um, we now know that that multi-million dollar instrument does a really good job doing complete blood counts. So don't do a manual differential. Don't process questionable transfusion orders without having a conversation with the clinician. They didn't really like that one. Don't process transfusion orders that do not adhere to best practices without discussing with an ordering clinician. So you can see that the ordering clinician was a really important thing for Choosing Wisely Canada, for us to be really specific about who this clinician is, because not all clinicians are knee deep in transfusion medicine. Don't report results on tests with low specificity without alerting clinicians to the possibility of false positives. Lab reports go out often with notes on false positives and high rates of false positives. We are relying that the clinician are reading them, and sometimes we're saying it's not good enough just to write a note on a report. You might need to phone someone and say that test is super non-specific and it has high false positives, so please interpret with care. Don't support lab information systems or EHRs that are not programmed to limit unnecessary testing. Well, that's a political question. So we were sort of told, no, that's not really for you to tell the hospital how to run their EMRs or their lab information or hospital information systems. So that one went to the garbage. Don't process orders for urine cultures for asymptomatic patients without appropriate indications. All of us know getting a really great urine culture that is a clean catch is not always easy. Not always easy. And it is an area that is fraught with complication for contamination. That means nothing about what's happening in the bladder, and it means everything about skin contamination or hand contamination. So this one came back to us for reconsideration. Again, we got to add an ordering clinician and it's good to go. And then number 9 comes along. And number 9 is don't wake patients at night for non-urgent testing. Do collaborate with clinical colleagues to redesign workflow or implement other measures to promote sleep. I'm going to guess I'm going to say there's at least 20 people on the call. Most of us have been in the hospital. It is not a place of great rest. And we know the importance of sleep hygiene for patient well-being, for recovery, for all of the things. And I will tell you from experience, having been 6 o'clock in the morning to wake patients up, sometimes those lab results don't get read until 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So was it really important that I woke someone out of a dead sleep at 6 o'clock in the morning to collect a sample so that they would be ready for the attending physician whenever they got to read the chart? Probably not. But you can imagine that many people believe that this is not the lab's business. So I went back to my crew and I said, this one's been rejected. And they said, really? Why? And one of the hardest things was this recommendation is throughout Choosing Wisely in the United States, which is a focus on sleep hygiene. And so then it became a conversation about, well, the Americans have it listed. Choosing Wisely Canada was patterned after the American system. Why can't we even consider this recommendation? So we shorten it up. Don't wake patients at night for non-urgent testing. Nope. So we send in more background, more research, more justification on the importance of sleep hygiene for patient wellness, on the importance of timeliness for some of the tests. Some of our hormone levels vary overnight. So collecting something at 3 o'clock in the morning may not be clinically significant if its numbers are not in line with how the patient presents when they're ambulatory or awake for the day. So we send in more information. No, no, Choosing Wisely Canada says, no, not your business. And we're like, really? Really? Like this impacts our workflow because most of lab staffing numbers on a day shift look incredibly different than they do on evenings and incredibly different than they do on nights. And so we felt like CSMLS had to really advocate for the change being requested by our members and by the leadership team at U of A. So we retried it. Don't wake patients at night for phlebotomy. We're being very specific now. Phlebotomy, it's changed without confirming the tests are necessary. Nope, that's not your business either. So we try it again. Don't wake patients at night for phlebotomy without confirming that all the tests don't have strict requirements or consulting with the patient health team about the necessity or the urgency of results. We try it again. Confirming clinical justification for the tests being performed at the given time. Nope, not your business. Don't wake patients at night for phlebotomy for testing deemed safe to proceed in the morning. Nope. Last try. This is a retry. This is months of work. This is me talking to the CEO of Choosing Wisely Canada saying, could you please just consider this one? Because I needed this to get to clinicians to consider, because it's not Choosing Wisely Canada that's the gatekeeper, it's all the other professions. So when other professions make recommendations into Choosing Wisely, CSMLS has an opportunity to weigh in on them as well. So the retry goes, this is like month 5. Don't wake patients at night for phlebotomy for testing deemed safe by clinical teams. Now we've got clinical teams. Great. It's getting bigger. More people are involved now. Clinical teams to proceed in the morning. We made it. So a tiny victory for CSMLS, but what did we learn? Jurisdictional and professional scope angst is real. Supporting arguments with high quality research is necessary, but there is a moment where it might not be enough. So we had to remind ourselves, why are we even sticking to our guns on this one? Because we wanted to focus on the patient. There's been a lot of information about hospital-acquired anemias, unnecessary volumes of blood collected from patients because they suit our workload. In some cases, I think about what happens sometimes in private labs. Having done blood collection myself for private labs, where we'll collect 6 or 7 of the same tube because that's how the tube system works. It's much easier for us to put a tube going to a specific analyzer and not have to worry about capping, recapping, relabeling, which is a human labor cost, but it reduces the blood volume necessary. So we had to remind ourselves why this work is important. And I had to remind myself through this process, which was not easy, that we are the voice of the member. And those members did work on that task force, and they felt that this was the really important thing for us to hold on to in the interest of Canadians, which is stop waking us up in the dead of the night if it's not medically necessary. So it was a fascinating project. We always have a good working relation with Choosing Wisely Canada, and we negotiated our space with them. And so that was a win for particularly for our volunteers. Our members will never know the struggles we had to get there, but now you have a little peek behind the lab coat to see the journey we went on. So, all of this to say, we have this huge list of recommendations. We talk about choosing wisely. We talk to our members about lab wisely utilization. I'm going to say at least once a month. There's journal articles. We share wisdom stories. We host webinars. There's always someone new to the lab wisely table who 6 months ago didn't care about utilization. And it could be someone's got a promotion as a lab manager and they need to curb either costs or resources. It can be amazing things like we suddenly have a blue top tube shortage like we did post-pandemic, and we have to figure out how to adapt coagulation studies to something different because what we want is not available. I'm going to tell you, that little tiny crisis was one of the best things that happened to us because people now realize we might have to do things differently one day. We like the way we do them now, and sometimes it's historical, but we were able to change the amount of blood volume we needed for coagulation studies when suddenly only 3 mil tubes are available, not 10. So I call that one a win. And we'd already been having conversations with the labs about the need for thinking about all the resources we have. And when you don't have the key tool you need to collect the sample for coagulation, or we've got an issue, right? So does anybody listen? The answer is yes. Our homepage has had 10,000 visits. This is 2025 numbers. Over 10,000 people have been to the website. This is open access, by the way. It's not behind a firewall. It's not behind a paywall. This is available for any human that wants to look at labwisely.ca. We've had people download articles, posters, and infographics. If you walk into a lab, you can see don't do more, lab wisely. And so patients now start to see this. We've had our database has been visited 7,500 times. And what I like is that people stay when they get there. They didn't accidentally get there, they're backing out. They're 3 minutes in the internet is a lifetime. And so people come, they stay, they access resources, and we've had over 3,000 different people use our calculator or widget. So remember this, where we had 500 recommendations, 60 societies, 72 specialties. We have a whole whack of toolkits, several pan-Canadian initiatives, and at least a third of these 500 recommendations have a lab component. Well, we decided that somebody, and we took it on ourselves, needed to make an aggregator. So we now actually have, for the last decade, had human intervention into the Choosing Wisely Canada recommendations that come out from individual societies, and they literally are like a one pager. You know, the Society of Pediatric Nephrology has a one pager with 5 recommendations on it. Well, that's not helpful if you have to click through 60 or 70 individual pages to find the recommendation you're looking for. So CSMLS decided to stay focused. It's not a whole Choosing Wisely Canada database, it's a lab database. So right now you can type in a procedure and see what is happening with respect to that specific test. So we have a group of volunteers across Canada that found 41% of the recommendations affect lab testing, and they look at every single one and say relevant, maybe relevant, not relevant at all. So things about like I'll think about use of inhalers. No, we skip over those. We agree those are not our business. Possibly relevant would be included, and definitely relevant are included. And this is just a tiny snapshot of what you see in this LabWisely searchable database. What's the testing procedure called? What is the lab discipline? What is the lab relevance? And so this is a place and space you can go in. You can type in hemoglobin, you can type in hemoglobin A1C, you can type in any test you want to see your analysis and see what other specialties have made recommendations. If you keep it generic, you can search by all specialties. If you keep it specific and you want to see what the pediatric nephrologists recommend, you can pull that up and see if they have any lab recommendations as well. So that's yours to use. And I have to talk about some success stories because this is all theoretical until you actually find out somebody did something and had some savings. So these are stories. CSMLS is always gathering stories, and quite often after we do a presentation, somebody will email us afterwards and tell us that they want to share their story. Because 2016, no sharing of stories. So when we started, North York General came forward and they said, you know, we've had a multidisciplinary Choosing Wisely committee. It was led by a strong physician leader. So I've put the highlights here on the enablers that North York General thought were crucial. Because one of the hardest things for the lab to encourage changes in ordering practice, and I kind of call lab test ordering like the all-you-can-eat buffet. All of the things that sound very interesting are there for you to click and check. And nobody knows how much they cost. Nobody really knows, at the end of the day, if this is the most medically necessary tool. We also appreciate, especially in an emergency room, time is money. You're trying to crank through so many patients, so you are not sure if it's liver, if it's lung, if it's kidneys. So you are going to do a smattering of tests. I call it the AK-47 approach versus a rifle. And you are trying to guess as quickly as you can where next to go. But that is a very costly approach. So North York General found having key physician leaders and influencers because it is best for a physician to tell another physician how to change practice, not for the lab to say we have some recommendations, because sometimes it's perceived that we just don't want to do more work. And that is not it at all. It's that we think there could be better testing, or some of these tests are unnecessary, or they're not going to give you the clinical picture you're looking for, because I use the A1C. An A1C doesn't change much in 90 days. So ordering back to back to back hemoglobin A1Cs that number's not going to change. And you're going to see that quite quickly. So sometimes just having someone say, no, don't order an A1C unless it's 91 days after the last test. They said they had to have significant physician and nursing engagement and to focus not on money. They had to, at North York General, part of their culture was to focus on care and patient safety. And so reducing patient harm by avoiding unnecessary tests, procedures, and medications was their goal, and they all agreed to that. And savings directed to implement new tests because without it, the lab is a very small fraction of a hospital budget, but it's sometimes seen, I don't have to tell you this, sometimes seen as a place we can make cuts because imaging as well as diagnostic lab services are places that the number is large because there's almost every single patient in the hospital needs our services. As a percentage, it's not large, and I'll just leave it at that. So they directed, though, their savings to implement new tests that had come along to help serve the physicians so the physicians could see it wasn't just about cutting, it was about investing. So that's the North York General conversation that they'd been having for quite some time is key partners involved, key influencers, and then they showed how they were able to invest in new tests after the savings were had. UHN is a little bit more specific in the information they provided us. So UHN realized they had been historically sending out their four subclassifications of the IgG, pardon me, immune globulin subclasses. You can tell I haven't been on the bench for a while, so forgive me while I stumble just a bit. They were doing all four subclasses selected, and it was sent out as a bundled test. And they decided to bring that test back to UHN because they were paying in their mind too much for them to sub it out. And so what they did was they changed the ordering pattern. So if you want all four subclasses, you now have to click one of each. And what they realized was physicians were really only looking for one subclass. So of course, lab leadership's like, why didn't you tell us? And management's like, why didn't you ask us what we were looking for? And so a really great conversation started. And they are now only looking for IgG4. Look at the huge change in testing. 2014, these are thousands of tests, right? 2019, getting smaller. 2020, we are doing the test most necessary for the diagnosis we're looking for. And so the director of lab services, Christine Bruce, I have a quote from her on the next slide. What did they save? Well, she wouldn't give me the exact dollar figure, but enough to buy 2 full-time equivalents for MLTs to provide other lab testing services to physicians that were necessary. Not this group of unnecessary tests they did between 2014 and 2018 when really everyone was looking for IgG4. So she said, to be really impactful, we have to understand our own institutions' ordering practices and tackle them together in partnership with key clinical teams. This is a tough space for some people in lab because we went into lab so that we could be quiet, so that we didn't have to work in intensive patient care. Some of my members tell me this is not my forte, is to reach out to people and talk. I would rather talk about the data, not about change management. And so you have key leaders that are important for us, like Christine Bruce, who said, I need to understand what your needs are before I suggest change and before I make changes that are beneficial for all of us. We're going to go to Saskatchewan now. The Saskatchewan Health Authority in 2016 decided they needed to do something about red blood cells. I'm not sure if you know, but we have a little bit of a crisis with respect to blood products in Canada. Multifactorial, I think the two biggest things that I've learned from my conversations with Canadian Blood Services, two things. The Canadians who usually donated to the Canadian Blood Services now in some cases need product from Canadian Blood Services. It was a generational contribution that was made by lots of people, and they're now getting a little bit older. We also have a lot of folks who come from countries now in Canada that don't have organized blood banks in their home country. So this is not a habitual practice that new Canadians have ever done. So we have a challenge because we don't have enough blood products to help serve. So 2016, Sask Health Authority said, we have to get a handle on appropriate administration of RBCs. This is where you started to see blood conservation as a huge area of focus for provinces because, believe it or not, there was units that would stale date or basically past their best before date, sitting on shelves in blood banks, and they would just be thrown out. And I remember years ago, Canadian Blood Services told me the actual financial value of a blood bag is about $400 for every single blood bag. And that is a 10-year-old statistic. So that blood bag is now probably worth $700 after we calculate testing one blood bag. And when you know that some people go through 10, 12, a AAA, 40 units of blood. This is a very precious supply. So Sask Health Authority said we got to get a handle on this. And they changed their processes for the administration of RBCs. They saved a lot of money, again, a little cagey on how much, and they saved a lot of blood products, which was their goal, right? Scarce resources, we have to use them wisely. But more importantly, they recognized that doing unnecessary transfusions means that you have not doing unnecessary transfusions means you could potentially expose patients to harm. And so they were happy to rally around the reduce risks to their patients too. And this is just a quote from our person. I'm a champion because it's the right thing. So that's a whirlwind tour. We also had heard from London Health Sciences. This is about 3 or 4 years ago. So there was a research project done to eliminate the use of one add-on tube in the emergency department. And the savings were hundreds of thousands of dollars because every single tube has to be collected, it has to be accessioned, it has to be stored, and then somebody has to go retrieve it and remove it from accessioning and discard it, right? So there's a lot of steps that happen even on a precious commodity that we don't ever need. And what London Health Sciences found was about 99% of these extra tubes tacked on in emergency for future use were not necessary. So they've decided that we will collect the samples we know we need right now. And if we have to do a recollection in the future, that's where they're going to spend their time, not stocking up fridges with things that we don't need. So London Health Sciences was a bright spark for some research as well. So let's talk about a tool that could just be used anywhere. So we focused on addressing a very specific recommendation, which was don't support ordering system mechanisms that contribute to over-testing. Some of you are maybe old enough to remember the old ER days where the doctor would order a stat chem or a chem 7 and they would order it, tech it off, and that means that 7 electrolytes all get ordered at the same time and probably a glucose. That's too easy. And so people who have implemented ordering systems that ask a primary care practitioner to select every single test that they need, or in some cases to get permission to do an out of scope test, means that people don't ask for permission to do an out of scope test. So simply by changing ordering patterns or requisitions, which is not the domain of the lab, by the way. So this is like the medical authorities in the hospital have to be involved in this change. They wanted to address this one because they felt it was something that would have its biggest impact. So they started with a comprehensive collection of literature, and we were shocked to know there was over 3,000 articles. And this is 2016, 2017. And no, actually, sorry, that was actually 2020. Identified key tests that were problematic where there was sufficient data to put into our calculator. So process of elimination, we had to go through and pick things that happen often and that happen enough times that it would make a difference to a system if you were to eliminate something. There's our old friend vitamin D, vitamin B12. Several places don't allow for natural ticking of boxes in this. We've got other things like just a glucose, a hemoglobin A1C. We've got a chemistry profile. So we focused on these tests alone, and we made, not to overwhelm you, a spot that you can go to, and it's just called the calculator. And you basically decide what kind of tests you want to look at reducing. Then you figure out how many do you want to reduce it by. If you're doing 1,000 tests, you'd like to get it down by 20%. You tell the system that. And then if you know your own costing in a facility, and I'll say very few of our bench practitioners know the cost of a tourniquet, know the cost of a barrel, know the cost of a phlebotomy, know the wages of a lab assistant, know how long we allocate for spinning down tubes. So a lot of times the lab doesn't have this information, so we use some published default information in this system. But if you have the specifics for how much your labor costs are, push ours out, put yours in. And we can help a system figure out what is best, or we would call it the best bang for the buck that you could do to eliminate some things. So right now, this person has used a very specific input. They know they've adjusted cost per test. We had some estimates, but you can see that you can change these numbers. You can figure out how much your labor is. A good example would be if you're working in a rural area, you may only have lab assistants who are loading equipment or combined lab x-ray technologists, not medical technologists. Those are all different rates of pay. So you know who's there, who would be handling the samples. You know who does your phlebotomy, you know if they're referred ins. You also would know possible the cost of your equipment. And then we also, how much blood did you collect? How much is the cost per tube? How much was the tourniquet? So we're now getting down to microgranule levels of savings. How much is the needle? And then you can run a calculator, and I'm going to show you some pretty big numbers right here. So of all of those analytes, if they reduced by 20%, which was that lab's goal, and they were using their own, they could save 481 liters of blood. They could save $182,000 in disposal of waste and cost savings. They're huge numbers, $800,000, $0.4 million in labor. Nobody's ever going to implement every one of those changes at the same time, but it can also allow you just to focus on a single test. There's just, if we make changes in my my favorite, the SED rate. We could eliminate 120,000 tests. What would the savings to our lab be? $5.4 million. It's huge, right? So this is a starting point for you to begin to do the push-pull of what's important to you. Dr. Smith and I were talking earlier, there are some areas where the actual cost of the test is not the most important thing. The actual tech time is not. I'm looking forward to where that little halcyon place is that is fully staffed, that is hitting all their turnaround times, because the lab is chronically understaffed across Canada, in particular in rural and remote areas. But let's say your staffing levels are not your single biggest driver, and what you really care about is your patient blood loss because you're running a campaign to reduce hospital-acquired anemias. You're just going to focus on that one section of the results and run your data. So this can be as complicated as you like it to be, or as simple as you like it to be. So hopefully, when you have time, which might not be today, which might not be next week, you can go and look at this widget because it is meant to be a simulator. It's a financial and blood loss simulator that can help you realize where you might want to begin conversations in facilities about making some changes to ordering patterns or something as simple as reflex testing, which is if we were to eliminate 1 out of the 10 samples that we unnecessarily collect, this is what we could save. So we're at the home stretch. Did we achieve our objective? Following the presentation, my goal was to see if you wanted to leverage some free resources to reduce lab testing in a manner that doesn't compromise patient care. So I've got a couple of links here. There's a direct link to the calculator with the QR code. I'll take questions anytime or ideas you have, even if a flash of brilliance comes to you later about something that's working weirdly on the tool. We're happy to take your comments and feedback as well. So yeah, I'm not sure if we want to close out the slide so I can see all the smiling faces. Is that okay?
I think you probably can. I put a link to the calculator in the chat too.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah. I already see. So yeah, thank you, Christine. That was tour de force. And I actually kind of like the looking behind the scenes about like what sorts of, things are, within the lab domain and I think like, feeling that out is, interesting to see the psychology behind it. But I definitely think I also like how it looked like a lot of the recommendations, you cut out a lot of extra wording to make it
Yeah,
more clear. And in a way, I think that kind of one of the things that I also think a value of cutting out unnecessary tests is it allows you to pay more attention to the tests that are actually of value too,
right.
which is something I think that often gets underappreciated because sometimes if you order too many tests, you might miss the key results that are actually really important for patient management. So yeah, I think there's a lot of value in a lot of what you're saying. And
I
thanks for
think
all
that's
the,
great. Dr. Smith, the one thing I just wanted to add is, it's not our area of comfort to do a lot of one-on-one
yeah.
consultations with ordering physicians, but we know a lot. And, like, I just wish my people would ask the question, what are you looking for? How can I help you? Like, are you looking for a very non-specific indicator, like I said, right? Or if you're looking for something specific, like rheumatoid arthritis, help me, help you. And so
Yeah.
in the US, they've got people doing a doctor of clinical lab management now, and that's been in the last 10 years. And they are like almost like navigators for physicians to help them pick the best. And the savings are hundreds of thousands of dollars a year.
Yeah.
And that's, I think it's a start of a new day.
Yeah, and I think I'm a hematologist, and I find we often are having those conversations with people about blood products. And
Yeah.
if you come at it with a collaborative approach, usually people are totally fine. Like it's very rare when people get their backs too up, unless you come at them very confrontationally. But most people, if you kind of approach it in a collaborative way, being like, I just want to understand why you're ordering this, and just to be aware that there might be some like this
Yeah.
might not be indicated, and maybe there's more to the story that you can fill me in
We
on,
would
kind of
never
thing.
know.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
for
I
sure.
see there's a question from Victor Leung, and then we'll get to Krista Marcon's question after. Victor?
Thank you, Christine. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. I'm just wondering with the lab widget, I saw that I haven't gone to the website yet, but the initial screen had a lot of tests. Um, there aren't any microbiology tests I see there. Is there ongoing
Correct.
work for development or how we can contribute? Because we are looking at this and the calculator part, we've done some work on urine cultures, and the way I've quantified it mostly is just per test cost and not adding in the additional cost that they have there. How do we work
Yeah.
to add
Oh,
potentially add
this,
resources to this?
I yes, yes, any which way. So we have a widget team, which would be my own researcher, Dr. Brandon Jukic, who's a PhD in chemistry, actually. So he appreciates a really good process, which is great. I think that the microbiology is definitely a hole that we have at CSMLS. You can see that even in our recommendations, there's nothing, and we have zero conversations about antimicrobial susceptibility testing. So, Victor, there's lots of ways. Either if we want to improve the choosing wisely for CSMLS, we'll be doing another round of recommendations. And we could definitely begin that conversation again about how to get information either into a recommendation or into the widget. The team would be open to help.
Thank you very much. I'll follow up with you there.
Yes, I'm going to make sure that I have my email address in the chat. I'm excited. Thank you, Victor.
Krista?
Yes, thanks so much for the great presentation. I'm just looking at all the recommendations now on the website. The first one is very interesting to me. Don't collect more blood than what is needed, use short draw tubes, add-on testing, etc. Do you have any success stories of people doing this? Because to me, this is sort of a no-brainer, but I know it would take a lot of effort potentially to make sure we have the validation in our lab for all of the short draw tubes, etc.
The only success we have is the forced anecdotal success of having to go from the 10 mil blue tops down to three, down to do we do micro containers now because there was lots of baby tubes available, and how do you do an adult testing with that level? So I think that is an area of opportunity for us. The other problem too, I think it sounds awful. I have no vendor relationships, and I probably will have none after this. Their systems are designed for a standard 10 mil tube. And so possibly, the heights, and because we've tried, what I've noted, oh, Dr. Noble, hello. What I have noted is there's been a huge push for us to move away from people touching samples, keep everything in a closed vial system, right? Use the needle aspirator for lots of reasons, right? Health and safety of workers, and the time it takes and the risk of mixing things up. So we've moved away from what we used to do when I first started working, was take a 10 mil draw and separate it into four aliquots and send them on their way. And so we've moved to higher disposable costs and all of the things in the interest of convenience. So I think it's part of a longer conversation, because there is never a time that you need this much serum. Like I can't name a test or 100 tests in chemistry that would need that much sample because we're down to microliters now, not mils, microliters.
Well, I know they do have tubes that are low volume but the same size that some centers
Ah.
have implemented for taking less blood per tube, but
You know
Yeah,
what?
it's
I'm
just
going to take that back to the team and see if that's like our next round of research because we may be able to pull some information out of another country, but I have not heard about those same size tubes, just drawing smaller volumes so they will fit the system, right? Thank you for that.
Andre?
Yeah, thank you very much. That was really interesting rounds and a lot of new ideas, and thank you. Um, One of the things that uh, you mentioned, I also appreciate is that you had some gut ideas or good ideas that didn't have evidence, and so they didn't proceed. And I think that really we have to move forward with some of those, gestalts or just general sense of what is appropriate for moving forward. That's how we practice medicine. We take evidence and then we combine it with the specifics of our patient, which is always unique. So it's always a, intuitive move forward combined with evidence. And so I think choosing wisely really, has to welcome those types of recommendations as well as the ones where there's 15 papers demonstrating that you don't need to do this. We have some intuition, and it's based on experience, and
Yeah.
it's if it's endorsed by a society, then uh, medicine generally should appreciate those recommendations. So if you're coming across limitations like that, I'd happy to throw my support behind your
You,
recommendation.
you know what? I do appreciate that. The thing not said, but maybe intuited by most is you know, I'll just speak from my perspective as a medical technologist. We sometimes feel like the forgotten profession, and it has to do with where we're located. It has to do with, the fact that we're a pretty lean operation and we still get picked on for budget reductions. People don't always appreciate the value of lab testing despite the pandemic, right? Like we were heroes for a very brief time and now we're fading into oblivion again. Um, it felt like another time where, we aren't all educated in the university sector. Most of us are come from BCITs, we come from NATES and Michigan Institutes. They're college diploma granting. This felt like another time where it was lab back in your hole. That's not your job. You need more evidence. And I'm like, but did every other subspecialty need as much evidence as we had? And I kind of like, and that's why became a very soul searching perspective for me, which is going to bat for my members about something that we felt passionate about, that was backed by evidence that we know is in the best interest of a patient. If I was a patient, I'd want somebody to pump the brakes on unnecessary testing at 2 a.m. And yet nobody had that voice. And so, yes, I appreciate that. And I think, that's something we should be having a conversation with at Choosing Wisely, because somebody has to be a first mover. We can't be the last mover because there's finally that last piece of evidence that sunk in.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, I see in the chat that Krista posted the article on the low volume vacuum tuner.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. Um, Christine, we fairly recently, like in the last few years, transitioned from a to a new electronic system, at least in the Vancouver hospitals, where it's physician orders. And so there was kind of this collaborative effort to kind of come up with these order sets for various patients admitted to different services. And one of the things our Planetary Health Committee has been discussing is the idea of having maybe even like funding the time for specialists in each area to revisit those order sets with kind of a
Right.
mindset of, reassessing now that people are used to using them. I don't know, Andre, if you guys have had any thoughts about this at the St. Paul site, because you guys were one of the first large sites to really go live with the electronic system. But it's something that I've been thinking now that we're a few years in, it'd be good to go back to those, almost like pre-tick boxes and everything. And maybe now that clinicians have been using these sets for a few years, they might realize, you know what, actually, we never really used this test or this value. So I'd be curious what you think, Christine, and maybe Andre and others.
I think it's that UHN phenomenon, right? Like my friend Christine said, I was shocked to find out. For decades, people have just been ordering this quad set when the only thing that's statistically relevant was the IgG4. And she said, "Why didn't somebody just tell me?" Because it's not their budget, right?
Yeah.
They got what they needed, which is the answer.
Yeah.
But it could have happened in a more, especially when they repatriated the test. Now it's happening that same day. They don't even have to wait for a send out. So it was a win-win, but she just said we were not asking the right questions as the
Yeah.
lab service.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea to revisit the order sets that are, you know, I don't know how you would flag them, but when we went live with Cerner at St. Paul's, yeah, Dan Holmes and Janet Simons in particular put a lot of effort into reducing unnecessary testing at that point, and so we had some.
Yeah. And I think I remember Dan saying that he had data showing that when you switched over, there was overall a reduction of like, I think 10 or 15%, something like that. So it definitely had a positive impact in terms of utilization, moving over to the system. But, at some point we should be reassessing things, just kind of like we reassess all our SOPs, we should reassess our order sets and just, trim the fat. And maybe also to Christine's point, there's important tests that we should add in that are not on the order sets. But I suspect there's a fair bit of things in there that we could either do less often or make instead of mandatory, make it optional, that kind of thing.
Agree, and probably a mechanism for people who are using these things to
Yeah.
point out things that are unhelpful and to
Right?
flag it for review
Yeah.
the next
Yeah.
time.
And I think Christine really highlighted that you want the clinicians to be engaged and in a way kind of give them the opportunity to lead these projects. So they're the ones that are treating the patients, and in a way you you don't have as much pushback then.
Oh,
I see,
oh,
I
I
see, I
like
see
that comment.
yeah, comment here. Yeah. It
Great
says
intent.
our med staff rules say IH that says that order sets must be reviewed annually to ensure still appropriate, but it doesn't happen.
Right. I've also heard
Yeah.
even changing the like because lots of the orders are happening now electronic, right? Even changing the location of the orders because they're used to doing the first seven and the bottom three, and then if you move one of those, they have to look for it and really make sure that that's what they wanted to order. So even if you change the way that the order rec looks, it can change behavior. Like you didn't
Yeah.
even take a test away. You just moved it to the less obvious spot of I'll take one of everything, please.
Well, and I think that like you're always trying to strike a balance, right? Like we're not trying to make it so difficult for clinicians to order tests that it's now making their lives worse because
Right.
they're having to tick, go through extra pages of tick boxes stuff. But you are still trying to, in a way, make sure that like put enough of a thing that makes them think,
Yeah,
kind of like a force function that makes you think, okay, that's actually what I want. Yeah.
for
I don't
sure.
know.
I think
Yeah.
my brightest spark in the last 5 years has been the huge push from Choosing Wisely Canada and their resident docs to improve climate change. And so I am super excited about the energy that new practitioners bring when, a 30, 40-year-old practitioner wants it the same as it's always been. So it's so great to see that enthusiasm around Choosing Wisely, and they're putting resources into helping that generation of practitioner realize that we have to do better. The
Yeah.
high cost of climate change based on the medical waste is astronomical,
Yeah.
which is
Yeah.
nice. Nice to see some
Yeah.
change coming, hopefully.
Yeah. And it's nice to see that alignment between kind of, you know, avoiding patient harm, you know,
Yeah,
saving money for the system, having less environmental impact. All of these things kind of line up together, which,
yeah,
so and so you can have people who have different motivators kind of all working together, because, whatever works. Some people might be more motivated by the environmental argument, but some would be more by the patient harm argument. Yeah. And I see Rashmi Chadha, who's, a leader in planetary health at BGH. She's saying that every health authority in BC has a planetary health sustainability plan. So
that's
yeah,
great.
yeah. Okay, well, it's 12:58 and I want to kind of keep things on time, but thank you very much, Christine, for this really interesting talk. And I think also it's going to be helpful for people to know these tools exist, and I think it's really helped raise awareness of them. And I think there's a lot of opportunities for these to kind of be used in projects,
Mhm.
locally to really try to improve utilization. And in a way, maybe if people do have success, they could, send an email to you because it
Totally,
looks like you are trying to collect success stories too.
for
So
sure.
hopefully we can feed that back to you as well.
Thank you. Thank you. It was
Okay.
a great opportunity. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Christine. Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone. Happy
Thanks.
Friday.